introduce Miles and we can go ahead and get started. Miles is the president and CEO of Nevada GrantLab. I've reached out to him many times to try and, I'm obsessed with the GrantLab, and I just am trying to forge partnerships with the coalition and the GrantLab all the time. They also have some great classes that I've taken and are doing some really great work down here in Southern Nevada. So I'll let you take it away, Miles, if you want to go ahead. Do we want to do a little bit of introduction, or you want to just jump right in?
No, I'd love some introduction so I know who else is here.
Awesome. Do you want to, maybe the NHC team can start, Amanda and Amanda?
Yes. Hi, I'm Amanda Lakin. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing at the Coalition. Happy to join and learn today.
Cool. I'm other Amanda, but I'm the Government Affairs and Policy Manager, so I'm Policy Amanda. I'm new to the team and happy to be on this call.
Awesome. I'm Joanna Amanda. Brandon, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Brandon. I'm a case manager at Northern Nevada Hopes, and we're a nonprofit federally qualified health center in Reno.
Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Inouye with Opportunity Village. I'm the residential director, and I'm sure our grants people have worked with you before.
Coral?
Hello, I'm Coral Flores. I'm a project manager at the Reno Housing Authority.
And Ariel? I'm just going.
Yes, Ariel with the UNR extension.
And Charity?
I'm Charity Gage. I work here at Ovation. We're a land developer of affordable housing.
It looks like we're missing, I think, Sheila and Chico, and Sheila is president or executive director of Vets 365. It's a community organization here in Southern Nevada, and Chico is a developer with Waco's community developer. So they might join later during our presentation sometime. Maybe they're in a meeting.
Very cool. Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I am looking forward to spending the next, I guess, 45 or 50 so minutes with you, doing a presentation. And then in terms of questions, definitely have time for questions at the end, but also really hope you'll jump in at any point. It sounds like we have a really great group of folks from different roles, different types of organizations, both in terms of your work area as well as the size. So I'm going to do my best to cover grants in a way that is relevant for lots of different people in different seats. But if I say anything that sounds confusing, or for that matter, if you have experience in one of these areas that you want to add in, I sure hope you do. I'm really looking forward to a conversation. Just so you all know, let me pull up my presentation. Let's see if I'm lucky enough to do this correctly. Hold on. Cool. Can you see just slide deck, or do you see the presenter view too?
It's the presenter view.
Of course it is. Let's see. Use slideshow. Not so much.
There it goes. Now it's just the slide.
Now it's just the slides. Okay. Give me 2 seconds. Let me make sure I can get it still on.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. I work 2 different screens, so sometimes it works out for me and sometimes it doesn't. So
yeah, now that we can see now it's not just the slides, but the kind of notes underneath too, I think.
How about we're going to do it this way, and then I can stop guessing and I can just get on to it. Awesome. Cool. So as Joanna said, I work at an organization called Nevada GrantLab, and a little bit background on us. We are a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit. We started a little over 3 years ago. In June 2020, and really started with a mission to support fellow nonprofits, public agencies, as well as local governments and state governments to better access and administer federal funds that would benefit Nevadans and strengthen their organization. So as an organization, we're really focused on federal funds, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why in a moment, but I'll say I think a lot of what we think about in federal funds, if you think about it, it's about the hardest money to get in many cases, at least from a grant application and administration standpoint. Federal funds are like the top of the mountain. So a lot of the stuff we'll talk about today and a lot of the work that we do regularly at GrantLab while focused on federal funds, we think also really benefits organizations as they pursue individual or family foundation or corporate foundation grants as well. So some of this stuff is a little bit more in the weeds, and I'll do my best to try to distinguish between those as we go. But here at GrantLab, we offer 4 different program types. I want you to know a little bit about these just in case maybe there's an opportunity for us to work together in the future. We do capacity building, so we do workshops as well as training resources. A lot of those workshops are in person. We do sometimes virtual as well, so we can welcome our colleagues from rural Nevada and northern Nevada. But we do, over the last, I think, 2.5 years, we've run about 60 different workshops, and they're everything from 75-minute introductions on building a federal grant budget through a very long 3-day federal funds academy, which is all the way into the weeds of all the policy and all the compliance and all the writing. So we do a lot of capacity building work. We also do direct grant services as well as technical assistance. So for organizations that are either preparing for or actually applying for federal grants, we can provide hands-on support through an expert network. So in grant services, for example, if an organization may be pursuing a National Endowment for the Arts grants and they've never written for a federal application before, we do our best to try to connect those organizations to expert writers around the country who have real expertise and background in a program area. We find that super helpful. We also, in terms of subject matter expertise, what we also find is that often the best grants come from folks who really know the work well and know the funding agencies well. And so we've gone and built a big national network of grant writers, and we try to make that available to our local partners. We also do building the movement work. So policy, Amanda, that's where you and I probably overlap a decent amount. We advocate in Carson City for improvements as well as investments in the state's ability to better identify, secure, and deploy federal resources. So we do a lot of policy work and we do a decent amount of data work. For example, next month, we are releasing what we think may be the first, at least in a decade, analysis of the nonprofit sector here in Nevada in terms of overall employment, revenues, expenses, locations, all that sort of stuff. So that's Nevada GrantLab in a nutshell. I'd be remiss to not acknowledge the way that we exist financially is through really generous contributions from donors and partners, foundations, as well as local government partners, so that if and when we find a community partner that wants to pursue, for example, that NEA grant, and they want to work with an amazing grant writer that's based in Bethesda, Maryland, but they can't necessarily afford it, we'll step in and help them cover whatever share of the cost they can't pay for. Federal grant work can be expensive, it can be complex, and it can be intimidating. So we try to deal with that by connecting people with great resources. And if they don't have the financial means to pay for it as organizations, we'll help underwrite that too. So that's GrantLab in a nutshell. I will give you the fair warning, I'm not a grant writer, which is kind of weird because I work in an organization called GrantLab, and I'm here teaching, in this case, a workshop on grant writing, but I'm not a writer. So here's what my background, just some really quick background for you is I come from nonprofit consulting and government consulting. I was in management consulting for a long time. Prior to that, I got my law degree at the Boyd School of Law. And before that, I got a journalism degree. So I know how to write. I understand federal grants working here, but I'm not actually a writer. And what I really tend to think a lot about is reviewing proposals. So I work often with our partners on building a strategy for what they want to apply for and helping them really determine as an organization if it's a great fit for them. So you'll probably see me lean a little bit more into what goes into an application as opposed to specific writing skills. So that's a little bit of background of what we're going to get into. So let me jump right in and say, I think about federal grants or even private grants like a Cox Communication or NV Energy or a Family Foundation grant as really requiring a process. And I think of that process almost always starting with understanding what the opportunity is. So let me quickly just touch base with everybody and see, anyone written a grant application before? Okay, a couple people. Anyone find or responsible for finding funding opportunities? Okay, a little bit. Okay, cool. So what usually we start with is some understanding of funding that's out there, right? And so in the case of the federal government, it's relatively straightforward. There's a place called grants.gov, and it's where virtually every single grant from the federal government is posted. So if you wanted to go to grants.gov right now, you can search by agency. For example, for housing, you may look at HUD, right? You'll be able to see all the different funding out there. It is not the most user-friendly system in the world, but once you get a hang of it, it's pretty straightforward. And I will tell you, compared to how you find funding opportunity at the local or state government level, it's actually relatively easy. Because unfortunately, here in the state of Nevada, for those of you that may have ever searched for state funding opportunities, there's not a single source website, unlike almost every other state, by the way, where you as community serving organizations could go and learn about funding opportunities that the state's providing. And instead, you have to kind of navigate this really complex labyrinth of state agency by state agency, and even sometimes within a state agency, multiple different offices within a state agency. So we haven't done as much as I think we can and should as a state government to make this easier for people to find funding opportunity. At the local government level, it can be a bit easier. So most of the cities and the counties all have at least one office, and in some cases, multiple offices that post the funding opportunities. I will just say, because we do policy work. So for my other friends who do policy and advocacy work, I think one of the things we all should be talking to our elected officials in the state about is making the ability to find funding opportunities, whether it's from the local government or the state government, much easier. And for a really short example, you can search either Nevada ePro or NGEM. That's single source procurement websites that we do for the entire private sector. So I know some of you mentioned you were in public agencies, you may already be part of NGEM, but here in Nevada, both at the local government here in Southern Nevada and the state government level, we use single source procurement. And so if you were going to sell toilet paper or printers or marketing services or legal services, the state of Nevada procures all of that through a single website. But if you were going to do affordable housing work like you all are interested in, unfortunately, you're still stuck going to 10 or more websites. So it's a huge opportunity for us to improve state grants infrastructure. So I don't want to miss a chance to flag policy, especially as you all are getting further into this work. But in any event, the journey starts with finding a funding opportunity. And at the federal level, grants.gov, at our local and state level, it's still tricky, unfortunately. And on the private level, it's even a little weirder. So if you think about corporate money, there's probably only 4 or 5 dozen large corporations in Nevada that are regularly giving. So companies like NV Energy or Cox Communication, maybe gaming, et cetera. Most of them have a page on their website or a section of their website, all the banks as well, that say, here's the funding that's available. So you have to go find something first. We're going to zoom past that Google exercise together and get right to it and act like we have what we typically think of as a notice of funding opportunity, a NOFO, or a request for proposal in front of us. That's the document that the funder, whether it's a local or state or federal agency, or even a private company, says, okay, community, this is what we're looking to fund. That usually will have some sort of program description, right? So we're looking to fund supportive services in an affordable housing environment. It'll have something like key requirements. Who's eligible to apply? Is this only open to nonprofits? Is it only open to public housing authorities? Can only local governments apply? Or can all of the above apply? So almost always you'll see eligibility. I will say on the private side, Cox Communication, NV Energy, those sorts of things, almost never allow a local government or public agency to be an eligible entity. So eligibility for federal grants usually includes lots of more types of entities than you ever will see on the private side. That NOFO or RFP is also going to tell you key information like timelines. First, when's the application due? But also when's the program start? And when would you be responsible for having the program concluded? It's going to tell you a little bit about specific program objectives and activities. So it's supportive services, but is it supportive services just for youth? Is it for seniors? Can it happen during classroom or after classroom hours? Does it include food? Or is it just for transportation, right? So usually a program will tend to hone in, especially if it's a government program, Private programs, again, NV Energy, Bank of America, typically a lot more wide open and flexible. So first part of the exercise is always read the NOFO, then read it again, then read it again, then read it again. And usually, just like if you were a student, what you'll start doing, what I start doing, is highlighting things that are key. When the funder says, this is our priority, that's information to highlight, right? When they say these are the programs that are eligible, that's stuff to highlight. Usually in a PDF, but sometimes I print, I literally just start there highlighting all the things that I think matter. And then I slowly will start moving that over into a one page that can kind of become like a checklist for me to evaluate when we get a little further along. Does this make sense for our organization? Does it make sense for one of our partners? So one thing I've learned over my course of fundraising for a long time now is most every organization can find a way to figure out how most every funding opportunity can support them. We are typically in love with our programs and in love with our organization. And so one thing I always suggest to people is it's great if you read a NOFO and you think, oh my gosh, this is exactly a funding opportunity. It's such a perfect match for us. Try to find someone else in your organization and ask them to take a look too. And I find that's helpful because usually if you are in a program side, you may see something specific that speaks to you in programming. Maybe if you're in finance, you see something that speaks specifically. It's more flexible money and that's really what you need right now. It's really important to take the time to go talk to the person in finance if you're in programming, or if you're in programming to go talk to the person in finance and say, hey, can you read this NOFO? And can you see if you also think this may be a good opportunity for us? Really getting people in program and finance or accounting to try to reach the same conclusion as early as possible is a great strategy to not waste your time and not frustrate colleagues. So we're going to review the NOFO independently. We're going to ask some colleagues to do the same thing. And then the other thing that we get a chance to do is try to conduct some additional research to learn about the funding and the past awards. So again, weirdly, right, because we usually don't think of the federal government as like super easy to navigate. Federal government actually is probably the gold standard here. USAspending.gov is a pretty up-to-date, user-friendly search engine. You can find all of the different federal grant awards, including subawards. So let's say, for example, the state of Nevada, a housing division got a federal grant from HUD and then subawarded it down to one of the regional housing authorities. That actually will show up as a subaward in USA Spending. It can take a little bit of time, but ultimately it gets there. What's super helpful there is you can go and figure out, okay, how much was awarded in the past under this program? What's an average award? You can even get details about the actual program proposals other folks wrote. So you can get a decent amount of information. Altogether, what we're really looking for at this first stage is analyzing the opportunity, trying to figure out what is the funder offering, what are they asking us to do, checking in with a colleague to make sure that we're on the same page and we see the same and we're interpreting the opportunity similarly, and then going and trying to find some additional research that really helps us start thinking about who else in our community is getting this funding. What's the average amount for a grant award like this? Is there one award or is there 100 awards? All of that's really helpful as we start to evaluate our readiness and competitiveness. So that moves me to usually where I get to second step is determining fit. When it comes to grant readiness and competitiveness, there's a lot to think about. I'll quickly flag, I'll pass around, or at the end, I'll work with Joanna to get this out to everybody. GrantLab has a federal grant readiness rubric. It's a self-guided evaluation. It's self-scoring. You can do it online with your colleagues. You can print it out. And it really takes you through a series of questions to try to help you and your team understand how ready are we to apply for federal grants. And again, federal grants are the most complex. So there's going to be more questions. So if you don't score well, don't sweat it, especially if you're pursuing private or local money. But really thinking about your readiness. In some cases, it's basic technical requirements. Are you registered on sam.gov? Do you have a business license in the city or jurisdiction you're thinking about applying to a grant for? I can tell you, if your organization, especially for the nonprofits, doesn't have all of your business licenses in all the jurisdictions, you really want to get those signed up. You really want to get those current, because ultimately they're one of the leading reasons entities can't apply for a local government grant when they're otherwise totally eligible because they just didn't have a current business license or charitable registration. So basic technical requirements. We also think a lot about things like your overall financial health and management. For example, does your organization have more than 90 days cash on hand? I think I caught most of you are in the government space, or several of you are in the government space. So it's probably not an issue so much for you. Some of you in the nonprofit space really thinking about, do you have 90 days at least cash on hand? The reason that matters is almost all government grants, whether it's local or federal or state, are on a reimbursement basis. And this probably won't surprise anybody here in Nevada. We don't have the most timely reimbursements. And so if you were waiting on a reimbursement payment from local or state government, you may be waiting a while, which means you're going to incur expense on, for example, August 1st today. You may not get paid for that expense until December of this year. So you really have to be in a pretty strong financial position to be able to pursue government grants. So we encourage people to really think about that. Another part of financial health is, do you have a great accounting system? Can you correctly categorize and tag your expenditures so that when you go to do the request for reimbursement drawdowns, it's not a weeks long and brain damaging process. So we ask people to think about that. The final section we encourage people to think about is the actual grant program elements. So again, back to that NOFO. Are you doing work that the funder is specifically looking to fund? If you're not, doesn't matter how ready you are, it doesn't matter how much you need the money. If your programming doesn't actually match what the funder is looking at doing, it's probably not a great fit. We encourage partners to think about competitiveness. Now I'll tell you, this can be tough. Competitiveness is a series of factors. One of them is how many grants are going out, right? We're working on a grant right now for EDA. There's only going to be 4 to 8 in the entire country. That's about as competitive as it gets. If we see 500 throughout the country, we can start saying, okay, there's a decent amount to go around. If we think about Bank of America or Wells Fargo on the other end of the spectrum, there may be 30 or 40 awards every single cycle. And so here, 30 or 40 awards across Nevada's nonprofit sector, pretty decent shot of going, or pretty decent shot of doing well, as long as you put in a good application. So we really ask people to consider competitiveness. Part of it is just how much money is there, how many awards. The other part of it is, what do you think of your programming? And I know this can be a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation, especially in organizations where we all love our programming. But part of competitiveness is thinking about, do we have the right data? Is our programs evidence-based? So if someone, for example, is sitting in a cubicle or an office in Washington, D.C., and they don't know you, they've never gone to your site, they haven't met your clients, and they're reading applications from organizations like yours all over the country, will yours stand out? And one of the most effective ways of doing that is data and really making sure that your programs are aligned to evidence basis. So if you don't have those things, especially if you're applying for something that's really competitive, 10 awards nationwide, really thinking pretty carefully about how competitive you are, because these things can be expensive and time consuming. So not going for a grant sometimes is still a really good choice, as long as you're thoughtful about it. Finally, a really easy suggestion I've learned to think about your readiness for this is starting to look at how responsive you can be. So in a NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the RFP, the agency may say, we're willing to fund supportive services, wraparound services in an affordable housing community in rural Nevada. We're looking specifically to target seniors. So usually an application, especially a government one, will tell you very specifically the questions you have to respond to. What it will also tell you is how they're going to score your application. All of it's right there in black and white, especially in government grants. So one thing we try to suggest to partners is when you're thinking about a grant, take a moment, can be really simple, whiteboard, one page, write out the questions that you're going to have to respond to in the application and see how quickly and easily you can answer them. That doesn't mean you have to have the perfect answer on round one, but if you find yourself struggling with the question thinking, I have no idea how that relates to us. Do we do that? Do we serve seniors? It can be a really easy kind of check early in the process before you get too far in to evaluate, does this feel like a good fit for us? So before I move on to content, I just want to say again, I think of grants as a process. It usually starts with finding a funding opportunity and really carefully reviewing it. Thinking about all of the key requirements, the priorities, the program objectives, asking a colleague to see if she came up with the same kind of read or notes, and then doing some additional research that helps you understand amounts. If other people in our community are already getting the grants, are you going to compete with your neighbor? Or is no one in Nevada getting this, right? And you'll be the entity to finally bring those resources to Nevada. And then really thinking about your organization. So separate, right? Funding opportunity, then your organization. Ultimately, you want to figure out if those two things match. If they do, you should move on to start writing. So that's where I'm going to go next here. I think about content in 4 different areas. Again, just a quick encouragement, if you have questions, I can do this all day. So make sure you jump in and interrupt me. When I think about content, I really think about 4 areas. The first one is usually something I think we do relatively well here in Nevada, which is we establish the need. We're pretty good, unfortunately, at describing some of the problems we have, right? I think in grant writing, it becomes really specific or really important to be specific and to use data, preferably local data, and make sure that the data you're offering or the problem you're describing matches the solution you're suggesting, right? So if we're talking about supportive services in an affordable housing community, specifically for seniors in rural Nevada, multifamily in Southern Nevada without supportive services is not the right data set, right? Data needs to match the actual solution. So thinking very carefully so that you get the right data that's aligned to the problem you're talking about. But the most important thing I want you to hear on this one is be specific. Be able to describe the community who's affected, for example. How many seniors live in and around that community in rural Nevada? Is it 1,000 or is it 12? Right? Thinking about demographics, age, we know we're seniors, right? So we described that a little bit, but what about income? Is this income fixed or a fixed income, pardon me? Is it a community that's income limited, right? So really thinking about being able to describe very specifically the population, the problem, the location. Is it rural Nevada or is it specifically, in Lund, right? Where is it? Psychographics can be super helpful here too, right? So thinking about describing those seniors, are they otherwise healthy? And we have the need for transportation, right? To get out and about. Or are the supportive services we're focused on here nutritious food that interacts or supports their medication, right? So what are some of the other aspects of the population? So explain the problem you want to solve. In this case, let's say we want to make sure that there is nutritious food available for our seniors in our affordable housing community in Lund, right? We're going to offer location, demographics, some context. Finally, why does the problem exist? Are they folks who are trying to age in place? Are they folks who are moving to Lund for the great weather, right? Why are seniors here? Sometimes context really helps, especially I was on a call this morning with some national writers who were talking about actual full service community schools in rural Nevada. And someone said, well, why would kids not at that school be at this adjacent after school site? And we said, well, there's only a couple thousand people who live in this whole county. So every group doesn't get its own building. That's not how that works in rural Nevada, right? You have one building that has to be multi-purpose, multi-audience, et cetera. So sometimes really just thinking about the context for someone who may not understand your specific program or your community or your audience. So take a chance to build some context that can really help a reader who, again, picture the person who's never been to our community, who's never met your clients, who doesn't see your work firsthand. Really think about how to build that context for them. Step 2, And I'll tell you weirdly, often I see grant applications that don't really get to this, especially on the private side. We spend a lot of time describing problems in our community. We spend less time and less space on the page describing very specifically how we're going to address them. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I invite you to kind of test that theory when you're out talking to colleagues. I've worked in this space a pretty long time in this community, and I find consistently we are very good at describing problems, and we'll spend 80% of our conversation on that, and much less time on, so what are we very specifically going to do about solving that problem? So step 2, and I would offer usually a chance to be as detailed and as specific as possible, is propose a viable solution. And the reason I say that is funders, whether they're local funders or the federal government, folks really want to invest in solutions, not problems. So balance that as you write, or for that matter, make a proposal to a donor. People want to invest in solutions, not problems. So apportion your time in an application accordingly. So some of the stuff we think about here is describing how a project will be implemented. This is really straightforward stuff. Think about it chronologically, right? We're going to provide healthy food to our seniors in Lund. And what that's going to include is a breakfast, lunch, and dinner service every day. Our process for conducting that activity is that we're going to bring that food from the Northern Nevada Food Bank twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's going to be in a refrigerated van, and it's going to go into the refrigerated freezers, right? And obviously, you don't always have space for that level of detail. What I'm trying to do is make a point around specificity really helps people understand you have a clear plan. You've thought this through. You know what happens right after step 2, right? Ultimately, duration of activities, thinking about it from a timeline standpoint, we're going to do food service for 12 months. That's the period of this grant, right? Some of the things you really will want to focus on also include who else is needed, what resources, right? So we just talked about, for example, a van, a refrigerated van. We talked about Northern Nevada Food Bank. We assume there's a refrigerator on site where we can put food. So you really want to be able to describe the assets that you may already have, as well as the resources you need. Resources may be financial. We need funding to buy the van and pay for the gas. But good news, we're going to be able to get the food in kind from our partner. So describing community partners, and then the core team, who's going to be responsible for that. Usually this sort of stuff especially will show up in your budget narrative. We're going to get to that in a moment. But anything you talk about here, it's going to have to get into the budget. So be specific. Finally, explain why your plan is a good plan. We are all predisposed to thinking our ideas are good, right? Most of us, when we say an idea, we usually think it's a good one. So often organizations think their way of going about doing something is good, maybe even great. And that may be absolutely true. But you'll have to help people understand, why is your plan a good plan? Back to the evidence-based practice. So for example, if we were talking about senior food service in rural Nevada, right, at Lund, and we were going to talk about making sure the food was really healthy, we'd want to go and actually find some sort of evidence that indicates that. Maybe that's AARP. Maybe that's the US Department of Agriculture that defines or describes what a healthy diet for seniors is. Maybe it's Health and Human Services that talks about the interlap or the relationship between healthy food and medication. We're looking for something that is more than just our opinion, or because this is how we've always done it. Those are valuable. Your insights and your expertise matter, but so too does an independent, preferably data or evaluated program write-up, right? And most agencies, federal agencies, offer some sort of best practices or evidence bases. So really think about the way that you can help build confidence in the thing you're talking about by saying, look, the thing we're proposing is exactly consistent with the US Department of Agriculture's suggestion. It's consistent with HUD's suggestion. It's consistent with HHS suggestion. And oh, by the way, AARP likes it too. That really helps you move your proposal forward and up in the points, right? So propose a viable solution. and be sure to explain why it's viable, how it's going to be viable. Step 3, this matters for everybody. I'll tell you a little bit more. It matters for government grants. I wish it mattered for private. It does a little bit, depends on the donor, but it always matters for government. So you have to have a plan to measure. You have to be able to measure the number of people you're serving. You have to be able to describe specific goals, objectives, outcomes. Choose your acronym, by the way, SMART, OKR, whatever you want. You have to be able to describe how are you going to measure the program. So every day we're going to count the number of meals served. Every day we're going to describe, or we're going to count the number of people, right? It can be simple, can be basic. Don't ever feel obligated to come up with 82 ways you're going to measure your program. More does not necessarily mean better, but definitely think about how you're going to measure it. And that matters for people because they really want to know that you're going to be accountable, right? Again, folks invest in solutions. And part of knowing that you're on the road to a solution is being able to offer the clear measurements, how you're going to know as you're progressing along towards that objective, and really thinking about how you're going to gather that data, right? So demonstrate you have a plan to track it. If you say, I'm going to count the number of meals, I'm going to count the number of people, you may want to flag, I'm going to do that every day because each person is going to sign in, right? Another suggestion, pro tip, if you will, don't offer to measure things that you don't have an existing process to do. I've seen often organizations will say, we're going to measure all these things. And they may sound great. And then they get a grant award. They start doing work and realize their IT system doesn't support that data input. And before you know it, you have people across a large organization, all of them tallying things on spreadsheets. It can be a nightmare. Really think about keeping it simple, keeping it straightforward, and preferably measuring the sorts of things that you have IT already in place to measure and track, right? Finally, folks really want to know where you're going with this. Where is this going to be? Now, the motivation for this question is different for government or private. But ultimately, folks really want to know, if we're going to invest now, where are you going to be in the future? So at a really high level, what's the long-term vision and plan? Are we going to build 4 or 5 more senior centers in Lund? Is that what we need? Or we're always going to be able to serve our population of 15 seniors with excellence. More, again, doesn't necessarily mean better. But folks will want to understand, funders will want to understand, what's the long-term here? One of the most important parts of that is understanding if it's sustainable or scalable. So if, for example, you're seeking a grant and it's a 2-year grant, what happens at the end? Will you be back? If it's government, that's somewhat more predictable. They'll often tell you they want a sustainability, et cetera, but government funds pretty regularly. Private, especially though, really wants an expectation that if they're going to put money in, at some point they're going to move on. And they want to make sure that when they move on, you have a good path forward without them. So this long-term vision idea is both, or issue is both the ability to say, hey, here's where we're trying to go in the future, but also I want you to know I have a plan because I understand you may not always be with us. So here's what we're going to do to make our organization sustainable or scalable, or this program sustainable or scalable. Finally, and this is probably obvious, but even government really cares, even federal government really cares about what it means for people's daily lives, right? So I know in private, we often think about the kind of more emotional stories, the case studies, that sort of stuff. Those are really relevant in private. Government, you kind of phrase it a little bit differently, but everybody universally wants to know, how is either a population or a community or a specific person or a household's life going to be better because of this? So really taking that moment to say, what's going to be different? What's this project going to mean for each person that it touches? And that's a bigger question than we served a meal today, right? It's grandma can age, healthfully and have a long life with grandkids, right? And all of those things, right? So really always taking a moment to zoom out and think about the bigger picture of what this funding means. So final thing I want to flag on budget. So sometimes organizations or individuals may be really good at the narrative side, right? They can really describe the program. They can talk about how they're going to bring it about, who's going to be involved, why it'll matter. And budget's more of a challenge. Other folks' budget comes more naturally. I would encourage you to make sure that you build the budget as you go. This is where I see folks sometimes lose points, is we have a project narrative, right? We've described we're going to get that van, the refrigerated van, out to Lund's, and it's going to serve 12 seniors 3 times a day with meals. But then you go to the budget and you see like an IT system. And you're like, wait, where's the van? Weirdly, this is regular, because what happens often in organizations is folks divvy up work, right? So I'm going to go write the budget and my colleague's going to write the program. And then because we all have too much to do in any given day, because all of our nonprofits and local governments have too few resources and too small staff, we're going to come back together 48 hours before it's due. We're going to put it together. And in 48 hours, if we're lucky, right? Maybe it's the morning of, but don't do that. And we're going to press submit. And what we didn't necessarily do, and we're going to lose points for it, is make sure that that narrative is fully reflected in the budget and vice versa. If that budget includes an IT system, the narrative has to explain why the IT system is there. Vice versa. If we're talking about a refrigerated truck, it's got to be in there. So really building that budget in lockstep. So every line, every addition that we're making in a program proposal, making sure that we're also accounting for it in the budget. So finally, folks often, I think, get a little caught up or have a hard time on how much should I ask for? Back to that first slide that we said, really research the NOFO, think about, research the NOFO and then build a plan. What you're really trying to do is balance what your organization needs and your specific program needs with what the funder is willing to do. Folks often want to jump to, we're going to ask for the most money possible. I don't find often that there are any points to be won by coming in at a lower price, right? So if it's $1 million is the max amount of an award, coming in at 900,000 doesn't necessarily help you. What helps you is that your budget is realistic and accurate. This is often the case, especially in folks who are in government, whether they're local or state or federal. So the folks who are going to review your affordable housing budget are folks just like you. They'll have a sense of what this work takes. So if you have a budget that feels really unrealistic, or whether that's optimistic or negative, right? You may lose points. So really thinking very carefully about making sure that budget is realistic, it aligns with your actual needs, and it fits within what the funder is willing to do. As I mentioned, budget and budget narrative should absolutely match. These things need to be the other side, right? 2 sides of the same coin. And then finally, expenses really do need to be calculated. So it's okay to have an estimate of something. I think that the refrigerated van is going to cost $32,500. You'll want to explain where you came up with that estimate. So usually in budgets, you have a number, and right next to it, there is a cell that allows you to explain it or calculate it. Really calculate. If you say, for example, we need $200,000 in personnel, what you really want to do is say we need 4 people at $40,000 each. The 4 people are program associates making $40,000. It's 1 FTE plus 28% of fringe rate, right? Calculations matter. And again, making sure that that narrative, as well as the budget narrative, fully explain. Why are those 4 people needed for this program? So a term allocated, right? These 4 people are going to work only on this program, so they're 100% allocated to it. And they're 100% needed. We can't run meal service if we don't have a kitchen crew. right? So make sure that any expenses you include are calculated, allocated, and justified. So I just tore through like federal grants in like 35, 38 minutes. That's the best high level or the most high level I think we can get. So I'm gonna pause and see if you have any questions, or additionally, if anyone else has experience in grants that they want to add and maybe share some experience and suggestions for how to do this work well, I'd love to hear them too.
I do have one question. So recently we applied for a grant, and it was, we got a call back. We met with the funder, and it was great because they said, hey, this project is solid. The project is already at the end of the planning stage. So it was very easy to write everything. How do you write a grant for a project that's still in its very beginning stages, knowing that you need to be so specific?
Was the funder government or private?
This one was private.
Cool. So what's nice about private usually is you get to have a chance. It sounds like you had this where you met with the funder and you had a conversation, right? So before you ever hit submit on a proposal, it's not a cold proposal. So I think in the private side, really making sure you're talking to the funder and being really forward. Obviously, you always want to have the right framing and a good packaging for your ask, right? Saying we have no idea what happens next is usually not a winning sell, but being able to say, hey, we're learning and here's what we're piloting, right? So I think in the private sense, or the private example, as long as your program narrative reflects the conversation you had with the funder, as well as the reality of your circumstance, I think that that's okay. And one of the things I would say is it's okay to note, try to distinguish and highlight the things you know really well. We, for example, know we want to serve 114 people in these 2 census tracts. We know that they're low-income seniors who are living alone. We know that there are 4 other community partners who are going to work alongside us to do. Here's what those 4 partners are going to do. Here's what we don't know is how long it's going to take to get all of those seniors to start using this new program. We think it could take up to 3 months, but we don't really know, right? So I think part of the strategy, especially with private funders, is reflect the conversation you had, highlight the things you know really well, and be very clear about the things you don't know. And I think within that too, sometimes there's a chance to say, we don't really know how quickly they're going to use it. We don't know if it's going to be 100% utilization in the first 90 days. If it's not, we can redeploy those dollars. Or if it's not, we're going to change a strategy and bring in a new partner. So identifying what you know, being clear and straightforward about that, as well as the things you don't know, and offer some alternatives for, hey, if this goes wrong, or if this doesn't go as planned, we're watching for it, we're measuring, right? Back to that measurement piece. We're going to know if they don't have utilization because they're not checking in every morning, and we're going to change our strategy to do this instead.
Awesome. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Cool.
Any other questions before I give my long, amazing comments? Well, I really enjoyed that presentation, Miles. Thank you so much. And I think you did such an amazing job of sort of distilling like the really key components, not only of grant writing, but also just of writing and developing programs that are useful and impactful. So what I really loved about the way you kind of framed this writing discussion is actually like, one of the things I've seen a lot kind of in my experience working in nonprofits for the last many years is like sometimes people will develop programs to just grab the money that's available instead of actually thoughtfully having a program already that they already have on and then going and seeking the money. And what I think the way that you've articulated grant writing is really so closely aligned with how programming should be thought through when you're developing a new program. And also for those of you who maybe aren't on the seeking money side of things, but are working with nonprofits as service providers at your affordable housing developments or working in different kinds of programs, these are the kinds of things you want to look for when you're in conversation with a potential programming partner, right? You want to make sure someone has really thought through a quality program and that they're seeking money to match their program versus developing a program to match the funding that's available. Would you say that that's something you experience in the nonprofit field, Miles?
Yeah, I usually ask people for past performance. Federal funders will ask this often. Private funders, I think, overlook this issue. It's okay to do something like Coral. It's okay to do something new. And as long as that new thing is aligned to like a plan and the needs of your community and the ability to and your like core competencies as an organization, it's great to innovate and it's cool to launch new stuff as long as it's well thought out and it's meeting a need, et cetera. So I usually will look for, like, if a partner says, oh, we can do this, I'm usually looking for past performance. Okay, are you doing this for the first time? How long have you done it? Can you give us some sort of data? Tell us about your track record in doing this work, that sort of stuff. Sometimes if people don't have past performance because a program is genuinely new, what I'm looking for is, what are your core competencies or assets? Why are you able to do this work, right? So we've got seniors already at Lund. We already do healthcare services. We do transportation. We do healthy activities. We do all that. All we don't do is food. And when we do surveys and ask our partners or ask our residents what they need, they consistently tell us food, right? So I'm looking for some basis for, like, why are you doing this now for the first time ever?
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that is really right on. I think what else I really liked about this presentation is also, so you're talking a lot about the programming aspects, but a lot of the writing kind of tips that you could pull out of your presentation are be specific, right? So like, make sure that you're saying exactly what you mean, and you know exactly why you're doing a program, and you know that why that program is important to the community is going to meet the need, and you're able to sort of articulate those things in really specific ways versus kind of broad generalizations. And I think that really helps think through the work we're doing as organizations to make sure that what we're doing is actually a needed program, right? Or it's not something that somebody's already doing or everybody's already doing, or it's something that you're able to measure so you know that the work you're doing is performing, or you're able to enhance what you're already doing to meet a greater need that you've noticed you haven't been meeting. So I really was struck in your presentation about the ways, like those key kind of things, like techniques for writing, techniques for developing programs, and also just like measurable, actionable items are all kind of woven into grant writing. Because it really kind of is a way to distill kind of the work we're doing and prove that we're doing it well. As well as get money to do it. That's the whole, that's
yeah. All of the above.
Does anybody have any more questions?
So easy. No one has like really hard questions. You want to talk about nonprofit operations or government more broadly? I'll take those questions and conversations too. Anyways, it was really nice to be with all of you. Thanks so much for letting me join. I appreciate the invite. And if you ever want to join any of our capacity building workshops, or if we can provide any grant services, you can learn about all of our work at NevadaGrantLab.org. And we'll look forward to working with you to bring more resources to great programs and projects that serve Nevadans and strengthen our organization. So thanks so much for having me, everybody.
Awesome, thank you. I just want to remind everybody that we will come together again with Miles in week 3. So after you guys meet with your cohorts and think of questions, and I'll also send this recording out to the couple of folks that weren't able to join us today, so they might also come with some questions. But I'll send a reminder about all of that. And awesome, it's great to see everybody. Thank you so much, Miles.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.